Hey guys, I decided to make a video of the arterial system for the arm, the forearm, and the hand because clearly I am not going out this Friday night. Skipping the axillary region, starting with the brachial. For simplicity's sake, I did put them proximal to each other on the distal humerus just so you're not really staring at my armpit. Okay, anyway, so the first branch medially is the Profunda Brachii. Profunda Brachii runs posteriorly, wraps around the humerus, and splits into two arteries. We have the middle collateral that runs behind the lateral epicondyle. We have the radial collateral that runs in front of the lateral epicondyle. Middle behind, radial front, where the radial artery is going to be eventually. Okay, and then we have coming up here this little fella that is the humeral nutrient artery. I think in the textbook it says it's the ascending branch artery. I believe those terms are used interchangeably. Dr. K called it humeral nutrient. Do as you wish. I don't know what to say. All right, and that thing is what goes up and meets our achapacha, the anterior circumflex humeral artery and the posterior circumflex humeral artery that go around the humerus, and it will communicate right around here. All right, and then we have our second and third branches: superior, inferior. Superior ulnar collateral artery, inferior ulnar collateral artery. The superior ulnar collateral artery comes behind the medial epicondyle. Inferior runs in front. If you heard me in the review session, one way you can remember it is that the superior represents taller people, inferior shorter people. Taller people will go to the back of the photos, shorter people will go to the front. So the superior ulnar collateral meets all four of these that I just mentioned meet the recurrence. So the posterior recurrent artery will meet our superior ulnar collateral. The anterior in respect to the medial epicondyle at least, the anterior recurrent artery will meet our inferior ulnar collateral. Then over here we have the radial collateral, it's the radial recurrent artery that will meet our radial collateral. Radial recurrent, radial collateral, radial recurrent, radial collateral. And then the middle collateral actually is met by a recurrent that comes off our common interosseous artery, which we'll get to in a second. The common interosseous artery will branch off into three. One of the branches will go into the arm, come out the back, and that is the recurrent interosseous artery. Recurrent interosseous meets the middle collateral. All right, so coming down, the brachial splits into two. We have the ulnar artery and the radial artery. I'm in table 6, and we have an abnormality. Our lady is the scoliosis lady, and her brachial artery is about this long. It actually splits into radial and ulnar way early, way before the cubital fossa. And so I heard that a couple TAs were going around telling our year that if it breaks off up here, the radial and ulnar would be considered brachial until it passes the line of this region. However, I confirmed with Dr. E that whenever the split happens, it's still radial and ulnar, even though our three branches are technically coming off the ulnar and not the brachial, because the split happens way early. It's just an abnormality, but for the test at least, we should just remember that it's not by region, it's by the split. Okay, so skipping down, as I said, it splits into two, confirming where the recurrents come off of. The radial artery gives off the radial recurrent, and then the ulnar has three branches we should pay attention to. We have the two that I mentioned, the anterior and posterior recurrents. but we also have the common interosseous. The common interosseous artery splits into 3 again. Splits into 3 here, splits into 3 here. The 3 that split here, one I mentioned before is the recurrent interosseous artery. The other ones are the anterior and posterior interosseous artery. If you're wondering what these X's are, it just means, if you've ever taken physics, you should know that it just means that it's going into the plane, and the dots mean that it's coming out. Almost like if you were to see an arrow go in, you see the tail end, and then you would see the head coming out like a dot. Anyway, going back to the arteries. The anterior interosseous is going to run down the arm. Posterior comes out the back and runs down the posterior surface of the arm. Or not the surface, sorry, the inside. And the anterior interosseous, in combination of the blood flow from the ulnar and radial arteries, they're going to come together at the palmar carpal arch. It happens right before the wrist. Palmar carpal arch. On the dorsal side, we also have a dorsal carpal arch. It happens a little bit past the wrist. And what happens is that the ulnar and radial, when it comes down, the ulnar is going through Guyon's canal, which is that little section between the pisiform and the hook of the hamate. And the radial, I'll get to in a second, but they both have dorsal branches coming off it. So as you can see here, it comes down, going to the dorsal side. That's the dorsal branch. This is the dorsal branch. These dorsal branches, which you could say dorsal branch of radial nerve, dorsal branch of ulnar nerve, or of radial artery and ulnar artery, those meet to form the dorsal carpal arch. Remember how, actually I don't know if I mentioned it, but the anterior interosseous artery branches off, goes through the interosseous membrane and comes out the back, and it meets the posterior interosseous artery. The anterior interosseous will give off another branch going down, and that's what contributes as well. So here, palmar carpal arch was with the anterior, ulnar, anterior interosseous, ulnar, and radial. Back here, it was the anterior interosseous, and then the dorsal branches of the radial and ulnar. All right, so we got up to the arches. Moving on, the next part I remember it as Roger Deep shoots a gun. Roger Deep shoots a gun. Who's Roger Deep? I don't know. But who's Robert Taylor, and why does he drink cold beer? If Dr. K can make up names, I can make up names too. So Roger represents radial artery. Roger Deep, so the deep branch, as you can see here, we just went over the dorsal branch, going to the dorsum. The deep branch is actually going through our anatomical snuff box and then piercing through the first dorsal interossei muscle, and it wraps around and runs transverse just straight across the palm, right about the middle of the palm. That is our deep palmar arch. Deep palmar arch comes across and connects back into the ulnar artery. It's pretty much making one loop around the thumb. Okay, and then Roger Deep shoots a gun. So gun represents the index finger and the pollex, the thumb. The reason why I said that is because the deep branch will give off 2 more branches. One goes to this young lady over here, who is our princess. The reason why I drew a princess because it helps me remember what the name of the artery is. It's the princeps pollicis. Princeps pollicis. Then the other branch going down the index on the radial side is the radialis indicis. Princeps pollicis, radialis indicis, coming off the deep branch of the radial artery. All right, so we got the deep palmar arch. We got to figure out how the superficial palmar arch connects. The ulnar, since the radial, we followed it going down the deep, we can follow the ulnar artery going down the palm, and it's creating the superficial palmar arch and coming right back around, connecting back with the radial artery. So it's just one loop up and down. Okay, I'm back. My iPad died, so I had to charge it. I think we left off at the superficial palmar arch. The superficial palmar arch gives off these branches. CPDA is how I remember it. When you go to the movies, you see PDA. Common palmar digital arteries. Common palmar digital arteries, CPDA. Commons here, proper is going down the digits. So it's proper, oh, you can see it laterally, proper palmar digital arteries. CPDA, PPDA. Common palmar digital arteries, proper palmar digital arteries, coming off the superficial palmar arch. Then we have the deep palmar arch, which also give rise to these arteries that link up with the CPDA. These coming off the deep arch are the palmar metacarpal arteries. It'll make more sense when I do the dorsal surface, but the region near the metacarpal region is obviously the arteries are named metacarpal arteries, and the ones that are near the digits are the digital arteries. So that's another way you can remember it. I think we covered everything on the palmar surface, so I'm going to flip on over to the dorsum. We've done the arch. This is another a couple things that might not be on the test, but it's just interesting to know, is that the PPDA split, and there is a branch that goes towards the dorsal surface. Those are the dorsal branches of the proper palmar digital arteries. You can see it from the dorsal side. Boom. Boom. And another FYI, the more you know, is that these X's represent the way these arteries communicate. These arteries actually perforate the hand, go in sagittally, and come out and link up with the deep palmar arch. If you can imagine, it's running through my hand and attaching to this artery. Okay? And those are called perforating branches. Very obvious because they perforate your hand. And then, so as I said earlier, it makes more sense to name the branches that are going down on the metacarpal surface they would be the metacarpal arteries. So we have the dorsal metacarpal arteries, and then the dorsal metacarpal arteries split going down the digits, so that is the dorsal digital arteries. Dorsal digital arteries. Remember how we had radialis indicis here? This is the dorsal indicis. Radialis indicis, dorsal indicis. Done.